Croeso, welcome, bienvenue, bienvenidos, willkommen to this series of CPD videos for primary practitioners across Wales in developing international languages in your primary settings. My name is Katie Hillier. I'm currently seconded on a short-term project with Swansea University, working with Welsh Government to support primary and secondary international language teachers across the South West, Mid and West Wales region in the 5 counties of Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion, Powys and Swansea. My usual role is International Languages Subject Leader at Pontedulais Comprehensive, so please do get in touch with me if you want any further help. My email is there on the screen, or I can point you in the direction of the various people around the different regions of Wales that could support you with your international language teaching. So this series of videos is designed to help primary practitioners to understand what it is that they need to be delivering in the primary setting in line with curriculum for Wales. And then also there'll be follow-up videos on more specifically which resources to use, how to use those resources, where you can find them, how to actually really get started in the classroom. So this video is more of an overview of what does it say about international languages in the new curriculum and some ideas for getting started. But if you're already at that point and need now to take the next steps in specific resources and lesson ideas, schemes of work for your specific classroom and setting, please see the follow-up videos. All of those will be located on Hub and in a Microsoft team that the details are shared later on in this video. So the aims of today's session then is that we will be looking at developing understanding of the requirements of the progression steps for international languages in the languages, literacy and communication area, so that staff have an understanding of how to meet the progression steps in your particular context, with year groups and so on. And hopefully then through that and in the follow-up videos to raise your confidence in how you deliver international language teaching, bearing in mind that really you're wearing the hat of learning alongside the learners. You're not expected as non-specialists to be teaching French grammar or real detailed Spanish, but really showing that the learners that you're learning with them, but having that confidence to do so and the expertise in how you do that by looking at the resources that are already ready to go and out there. And I'll show you where then some of those resources are already saved. And as I mentioned, there'll be follow-up videos that really go into detail better on how you can teach with these resources. This video and the follow-up videos will be all in English, but all of the PowerPoints and videos will also be available in Welsh. And again, we'll show you where those are saved at the end of the session. Please feel free to pause on the different English or Welsh slides, depending on your setting and for discussion. So why then? Why are we looking at international languages specifically in Wales? As well as it's part of the new curriculum, the Welsh Government for the last few years have had a Global Futures initiative, which is a plan to promote and improve modern languages across Wales. So there are 3 main aims of this in supporting multilingualism in schools, in really trying to increase the number of young learners who are getting the chance to study languages at all different levels. So through different Global Futures events and regional support across Wales, the Global Futures team aims to support the delivery of the international language lessons, to provide practitioners such as yourself with skills and knowledge to do that, to be able to effectively give international language lessons depending on your context, but also to challenge misconceptions around language learning. And there are a lot more stakeholders involved with Global Futures who are able to help to deliver sessions and resources in showing children the benefits of learning language, especially given that we are a bilingual country and are aware of the benefits, the cognitive benefits, the benefits of the impact on understanding your own language and so on in learning more and more languages. So let's get into then what it says in the new curriculum. First of all, I want us to, before we have a look at that, have an understanding of where we're at so that we can know where we're going with the next steps. So we have this continuum here, which will hopefully give you an idea of roughly where you're at and where you need to be going next for your pupils. So where are your pupils and your school or your setting currently at? It could be that you're right at the beginning. Maybe there's been some confusion for yourself or your setting over what it actually says in the new curriculum about international languages, which classes should be receiving it, what year groups, how far do we need to teach it, and so on. Perhaps in your setting or region, there has been very little or no support to get started, and so you're feeling a bit lost. And then in terms of multilingualism and looking at English or Welsh as additional language learners and their home languages, maybe within your setting, you're potentially at the start where those languages are left at home. They're not mentioned in school, they're not really part of the school day, not necessarily being utilised for the children to help them with their learning. So we all have to start at this point, and if you're still here, that's okay, that's what these sessions are for. Next steps then, ideally, once we understand what it says about international languages in the new curriculum, we would then maybe begin to teach languages perhaps just with 1 year group to start. And it might be that those languages lessons are just isolated lessons where it's not having an impact outside of the classroom or not being embedded cross-curricularly, but we have at least begun those lessons in isolation, Spanish, French, German, whatever it is. And maybe then in terms of home and community languages, we begin to build a greater awareness of the learners languages and cultures that are present in our school and amongst the staff as well. Next step then would be spreading that language teaching across progression steps 2 and 3, as we'll see with the curriculum shortly, so that it isn't just a 1 year group maybe who have started it and trialled it. We've now across the school begun to teach it in the right context. Secondly then, the environment around the classroom. So we'll look at ideas like putting multilingual signage up in future sessions, or having multilingual displays, putting flags and pictures around so that the environment reflects the language that is being learnt in the school or reflects the home languages, community languages, and that they are therefore, as that third point demonstrates, they're present and part of an aspect of either of the curriculum of the school, and we'll look at some examples later on. Moving on then, it might be that not only languages are then taught in these isolated Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, whatever lessons they're in, but then we start to visibly and see these languages present around the school in displays and people's work and so on that are being taught, but also maybe we begin to hear them as part of the school day, maybe used in assembly, maybe used in the corridor greeting each other in a mixture of Welsh and the taught language. And then that languages begin then to be taken outside of the isolated lessons and taught across the AOLE. So we begin to be able to make cross-curricular links, and we'll give some examples in future sessions. So looking at, if we're looking at Tutankhamun, for example, and the Egyptians, and your language taught is French, giving it a little go of putting the French they've been learning into context by introducing themselves as Tutankhamun in French and saying a bit about themselves. And then through doing all of this, and the home languages, the community languages being present as well, and all staff and all pupils giving languages a go, that positive attitudes to multilingualism are really beginning to be developed, that pupils and staff have buy-in, they see the positives that it brings to being multilingual learners and teachers. So that the aim goal then is that there is a whole school multilingual approach, that all staff and all pupils are linked in with languages. There's pupil voice to do with it. All staff are giving it a go. It's visible in every lesson that it's relevant in, audible across the school, and that it's not just embedded, but it is reviewed, so that it isn't something that happens for a couple of years and loses momentum when the next thing comes in, but there are staff who are responsible for international languages and keep a review in how it's working through pupil voice, discussing what the pupils want to learn, looking at is it being used cross-curricularly, is it being used outside of the classroom, and so on. So hopefully this will give you an idea of where maybe you're currently at and the next steps. And so please do, if you're using this as a CPD session in an ad session or INSET or even on your own, feel free to pause the video here to discuss where are pupils at, where do I feel I'm at, where is my classroom at, where is my setting at, whatever it is, so that you can have a think about what your next steps are. So into the LLC then. So we are aware, obviously, the languages, literacy and communication area of learning, as these quotes say, from the curriculum for Wales, should encompass Welsh, English and international languages. And there's lots of wording throughout it. I'm not going to read the whole of the LLC area to you, but there's consistent reference to how children should be entitled to learning another language and they should be explored in relation to one another, that we're not just isolatedly teaching Welsh, English, and whatever our third language is, but they're holistically being approached. And as I said, rather than read through the whole LLC, I've pulled out some key themes. The Welsh is here, but we'll go through it in English, that you can see across the LLC, not where it gets into the specifics of international languages, but across where it talks about all three languages. There's a lot of same important themes coming out. So first of all, there's a lot of quotes, here's just a couple, that reference supporting learning across the whole curriculum, so that children are encouraged and have the opportunity to transfer what they're learning about how languages work in one language to another, making those comparisons. Oh, look, what do you notice about, for example, days of the week in French and Spanish compared to Welsh and English? They don't have capital letters here, they do in Welsh and English. And so making those comparisons, helping them to develop a richer knowledge of their own language, and whether it's Welsh or English, whichever first language. There's a lot of quotes and references then to building that enthusiasm for languages. At the primary level, it is not expected that you are getting pupils to one specific standard in a language or to the same level as Welsh. It's really about igniting that curiosity for them. While they're little, really harnessing that interest for differences, looking at things like, we'll show some resources in future lessons, some really interesting things, looking at comparing lunchboxes and what people's have in their lunchboxes across the world. Being able to give them a real interest in languages by showing from an early age the positives of why it's good to learn another language. Then there are a lot of references as well then to challenge and how that links to creativity. Here's just a few quotes from throughout the LLC talking about taking risks, and as you do that you become more creative because you just try different things, and giving pupils the opportunity to do that. And it can be challenging to learn a new language for some children, and therefore what we're doing here by introducing another language is giving them a chance, an opportunity to try to be ambitious, to try something new, to try to persevere when they're facing challenges, and overall really build their confidence. Speaking another language is all about communication and putting them sometimes in situations. Myself, I know as a child, not wanting to speak in front of others, speaking in other language puts you in positions where you have to give it a go, and really you realize actually it's okay to make mistakes. It really develops your confidence. And finally, there is so much throughout the LLC that international languages supports in terms of understanding a pupil's own identity, but also others and their own culture and others, and empathy for that. So in looking at other cultures through the different languages, we're able to help children become ethically informed citizens, that they are not just having an understanding of other cultures and differences, but they're having a chance to celebrate those differences and really enjoy learning about how other people live, how other children celebrate things, and developing their own sense of their identity as you make comparisons to what we do in Wales. So they really begin to make a link between how we live, how we speak, what we do compared to others. So there's just some of the cross-cutting themes that international languages really support English and Welsh, and being able to achieve these aims for our children. So if we get into now the specifics of what it says within the LLC for international languages, as we're aware in each area of learning and experience, there are statements of what matters, and these are the four for the LLC, about languages connecting us, understanding language to help us understand the world, expressing ourselves, and literature. So we know as well then within each of these statements of what matters, we have the descriptions of learning. So we're going to take some time now to look at the descriptions of learning for languages and international languages specifically, so we can have an understanding of what do our children need to be experiencing and at what points. So the first statement of what matters, languages connect us. These have the same descriptions of learning for all language areas. So the steps we're going to look at now, the progression step descriptions of learning, they all are exactly the same, whether it's English, Welsh as an additional language or a first language, and international languages. So at progression step 1, hopefully familiar through teaching English and Welsh that these are the expectations for children in progression step 1. Very much looking at the beginning to be aware of how language links to your culture, to who they are, beginning to understand that there are different languages, even if they don't necessarily understand if they hear a Welsh word or a French word, which language they belong to, but having an understanding there are, and then talk with their peers in the language of their setting or school. So that's English or Welsh. So there isn't a lot of emphasis here for international languages, but ideally, looking at these two in particular, they will have heard other languages being spoken, and we'll look at how we can do that in some specifics shortly. Looking at progression step 2, then there are more descriptions of learning here, but it also moves it on. They're very much linked to progression step 1, as you'll have seen. Rather than beginning to have that understanding, then I really do recognise that people will use different languages and which language they belong to, and the link between Welsh and their own sense of Welsh identity and the things the culture we have. When we get into more international languages, then we're able to, if we look at the third one, help children begin to understand the similarities and differences between our languages if they are learning a third language. Because without that, it's very hard to make even more comparisons, draw more differences, look at etymology and things like that, as we'll see, if they haven't had the experience of comparing it to a third or fourth or fifth language. And this last point here, I'm beginning to draw on information presented in one language and convey it in my own words in another. This is the idea they're starting to do this term you might have seen in the LLC called translanguaging. In a nutshell, it's looking at doing an activity in one language and it influences the activity in a different language, an input and an output language. For example, watching a video in Welsh but doing an activity on it in English, things like that. So we have some resources. I'll show you the Teams area, like I said, where we have a CPD session on translanguaging and what you can do. And at this level, it really is just beginning to do it in really basic, simple ways. When we get into progression step 3, then, that's when they're really doing, if we start here, the bottom point, that's where they are really having a go at translanguaging. And again, please see the CPD sessions on that for more help, as well as resources on Hub. So when we look fully at the progression step 3, then, the ones that really line up to international languages is bullet point 2, I can communicate in a growing range of languages. This doesn't mean that they are at the same level. Communicating is being able to say even a few words in that language. So if you are doing language of the month and having a look at a different language each month, then they're getting the chance to communicate in a growing range of languages. But if we're only introducing Welsh in primary school and English medium settings, then they're not experiencing a growing range of languages. And also that allows us then to be able to look at the next 3 bullet points as well, recognising connections, commonalities between the languages, understanding how languages have evolved and changed. And it can seem a bit daunting to bring in this part of etymology, but we'll have a look at some examples later on in the session, or in future sessions rather, at how this can be done really simply, asking the learners to which words they want to look at. Where has this word in English or Welsh come from? Let's explore that, and making links, for example, with days of the week. And then recognise and respect in different accents and dialects. Introducing into other languages is a great way to do this. We can certainly look at the differences between Welsh in South Wales and North Wales, for example, but we can also, if we're teaching, for example, Spanish, look at the differences between recognising that they sometimes use different words in South America to Spain, where it might sound a little different, and it allows us to really enrich the curriculum by looking at another language. So we're just going to pause here on the languages connect us statement of what matters. You could either pause the video on the Welsh or on the English, and I've put them all back there just to have a reflection on these do apply to English and Welsh, but without international languages, it is harder to achieve some of these progression steps for our pupils. So I want you to reflect on your own or in the group setting, take some time to think, what are your pupils currently doing this year or planning to do this year, or perhaps what have they done in previous years that helps them to work towards meeting these statements? And what could we do extra without jumping into the nitty-gritty of international languages, but just thinking now about if we're introducing, for example, Spanish, or in another area of learning, how could we develop some of these other descriptors of learning if we haven't yet introduced Spanish or French or German, whatever it is, are there any ways currently I could think of, having reread these and thinking in light of international languages, that we could be doing for our children to help them to meet these progression steps? Okay, let's get into the other three statements of what matters, because as we've seen, for the languages connect us, we have the same descriptions of learning across all the different languages. It's when we get into the other three then, so understanding languages, expressing ourselves, and literature, this is where they have different descriptions of learning for each language. So we're going to look at the international languages ones now. So progression step 1 then, the descriptions of learning for these three, there is absolutely nothing there. So if you look on the Hub website and go into progression step 1 and you're finding out about international languages, there's just completely blank. This is not to say you can't introduce languages lower down the school and with your early years learners, have a go at some other languages, because as we've seen, having the chance to hear some different languages in their environment would really help to achieve this. But there is nothing statutory here. So we'll have a look, like I said, in a breakdown at 1 or 2 ideas shortly, but let's jump on to progression step 2. So progression step 2 then, we've got our ones that are the same here for languages connect us for all the languages. The ones that are different for international languages, there's just one description of learning for each statement of what matters. So they've heard international languages being used to reach progression step 2. They've experienced opportunities to use them and experienced literature from other cultures, so that could be in English or Welsh, and in international languages. So let's break some of these down. Hearing international languages being used, this can be very, very simple. One of the best ways to do this, especially around the age that maybe some of your children are reaching progression step 2, would be to use songs. They're having the opportunity to hear them. You, who potentially are a non-specialist and don't speak French, Spanish, whatever the languages is that your school have chosen, you then are not modelling the language for yourself. That maybe is a little bit tricky. The songs are modelling the vocabulary for the pupils, and it's a really great way then for them to experience opportunities to use it. They could learn the songs, they could sing them back, they could be ones you do regularly, so you could have a few songs that you are cycling through the year that they listen to regularly, so they know that vocabulary really well. They've got a good grounding in a few basics through those songs, like greetings, days of the week, feelings maybe, so that when they get into the years later on and they're working towards progression step 3, they have a really good understanding of the sounds of the language and some of the basics. You could use it for feelings, for example. In the morning, they could learn how to say how they're feeling through a song, and then they say how they're feeling in the morning. They use what they've heard from the songs in a context. And in terms of literature then, literature in the new curriculum is songs, rhymes, stories, and poems. So listening to songs in other languages is experiencing literature in an international language. But there's also so many books out there about different children around the world or different cultures in English or Welsh, and we have some CPD sessions in the team as well that develop this and show the different kind of books you can use, that you can fit in with different contexts, where you might fit them in. So please do have a look at those and get in touch if you'd like some more support in looking at books. But it's a great opportunity to even look at a book in a different language that is similar to the one that you're looking at. Or for example, we show how you can use Dear Zoo, or books like I'm Going on a Bear Hunt and things like that, or The Hungry Caterpillar in an international language, and it has a lot of vocabulary that's repetitive that they might be learning anyway, like foods and days of the week in The Hungry Caterpillar. So some real basic language at this stage, but they are getting a chance to hear it and to use it to express themselves. On to progression step 3 then. This is where it does get a lot more details. There's going to be a lot more words on the screen, so we'll pull out some of the key points from progression step 3. So first of all, for understanding language, there's a high emphasis here on recognizing high frequency words. So in other words, we want to try and get a real depth in their knowledge of the language rather than breadth. If they can know 3 topics really, really well, where lots of the words are recycled and used again, that's even better than hitting many, many topics throughout their time at primary school, but they don't know them well because there's not a lot of repetition. So the schemes of work I'll be showing in future videos help to do this and keep repeating words, they are building on their knowledge. There's also then now, rather than just hearing in progression step 2, they now at progression step 3 need the chance to read. So listen and read, we see there 3 times, so that they are building this bank of words, these high frequency words, that they can then put them together in their own sentences. So for example, if they were learning opinions, which we'll see on the next slide, and they learn opinions like I like, I don't like, I love, I hate with foods, then in the next topic they learnt it with sports, something like that. They've got that bank of words, they're recycling high frequency words they can use again to improve their own communication. And as they listen and as they read the international language, gaining understanding of the grammar and punctuation. This doesn't mean you need to have really detailed knowledge of French grammar or anything like that, but helping children be detectives of the language in recognizing, oh, which language has got an upside down question mark at the start? Why do you think that might be? And things, which is Spanish, and things like that. So getting them to just make these references and see how they affect the meaning. If we look then at expressing ourselves, it's all about, again, the familiar phrases and sentences. Communicate using those familiar phrases and sentences, ones that they've heard often and know really well. Reflecting on their language in order to improve. So thinking about, well, I used I like lots here. Shall I use I don't like now? And trying to think about different ways they can switch up their language. Getting them to be the experts of the language and listening to each other and recognizing where they need to improve their pronunciation. You're learning alongside them, so really use them as the experts. And beginning to interact with others, sharing information, feelings, and opinions. There is no prescriptive list from the new curriculum of the words or sentence structures they have to learn in an international language. But this is the only time really it does emphasize something they need to learn, where it says opinions and feelings. They need to be able to say whether or not they like or don't like something in the international language. But again, using opinions and their feelings about things is a really great hook for having those familiar phrases that they're building over and over again, so that they can construct their own sentences using the vocabulary patterns they've learned that they're used to taking. For example, in Spanish, me gusta, I like, and then putting something else different with it. They're used to the word and, that's going to be the same in each topic, and so on. Then when it comes to literature, let's pull out some of the key points here again. So they've experienced, again, like progression step 2, but experiencing songs, maybe some rhymes, stories, poems, responding creatively. Could they adapt a song? Could they make up a rap in a different language with a mixture of English, Welsh, and an international language? Can they try and create something really basic in the international language, as it says here, using the familiar words and phrases they've learnt? So to creating a short acrostic poem about something they like, for example. And then expressing opinions in the language of their choice with views does not necessarily mean that they have to give detailed descriptions of how they feel about a poem or a book, or if they watch a video about how children celebrate Christmas in another country, being able to express their opinion in English and Welsh as well, based on the different literature and things that they have seen. And then show their empathy. So we really want to build that understanding of how you see that somebody is different to you, how they eat differently to you, how their lives might be different to you, and modelling to children in English or Welsh how you respond with empathy, how you respond with understanding and curiosity at the differences. So there's a lot of detail there. So we have here from Central South Consortia actually put this summary together of what it actually says, a breakdown a little bit easier on how it would look in context. So I've got these slides in Welsh and English, so please pause on the language of choice. I'd like you to discuss what are you currently doing perhaps in Welsh, if you're in a English medium school and you're teaching Welsh as a second language, that you could do in, say, Spanish or French or German, Mandarin, whatever language it is that you're teaching. And then, are there any ideas based on what we've been looking at so far in this session right now that are jumping out to you of how you could meet progression step 2 and 3 in particular? For example, where might be the most natural place to begin? Where might be the most natural place to bring in some international language? Well, so let's just shortly look at these, as I mentioned we would. So with progression step 1, they don't need to use any international language, but if you wanted to, they could just use incidental classroom language, answering the register, saying if they're going to have sandwiches, dinners, that sort of thing. And it could just be one day of the week that they do that. Within assembly, if you have guest speakers from the community where they get to hear different languages or get told about different cultures, what people do at different times of the year for different cultures and languages, then that would also help progression steps 2 and 3, but help them to understand that there are different languages and begin to raise the profile of community language from an early age. So children do not feel a stigma that they speak a second language at home, that it's celebrated, encourage them to use it in the classroom, encourage them to make comparisons, ask them questions about their languages so that other children see it's a positive around them from an early age. Into progression step 2 then, this is where you begin the simple international language teaching. Ideally, maybe through some songs so that they've got a fun way to hear it and to use it, and they're experiencing some literature like the books we mentioned, and so plenty of cultural experiences. So they're learning about, as we mentioned, how children live around the world in different countries, what they do to eat or drink, celebrate, and so on. Progression step 3, then that's where it becomes more regular language teaching. A specific slot, ideally each week or each fortnight, depending on the time, where they know they're having their specific language lesson. So it becomes embedded and not as we know the day is so busy and the curriculum is so busy trying to fit everything in that it doesn't get sort of pushed out or anything, that there is a protected time for it. Again, that is going to be, I know, difficult in certain contexts finding that time, and it's a discussion to have as a school. But within those lessons then, and outside of those lessons, exploring the connection between language, cultures. How are they different? How do they impact us? A little bit of etymology, which you could start to plan for some simple etymology activities here, to perhaps try some, but this is where you would really look at how languages have changed. Let's look at the days of the week, for example. If you look at the spelling patterns, we'll look at in a future video when we look at specifically at languages, they're very similar. Like, I wonder why that is, go away and research, get the children doing the activities of the etymology and discovering for themselves, as well as some translanguaging. And again, we looked at not just listening, but they need to see the spellings of the words when we look at reading. Some simple, maybe reading text, simple sentences, where they're seeing the words, whereas the emphasis here is really hearing it, getting that pronunciation before they read it. And the chance to write and speak using simple patterns, emphasis definitely on the speaking with communication, so that they're beginning to build confidence in using the languages that they've learned. So please pause here either on the Welsh or English slides to discuss or reflect on ways you could start to bring it in, to plan, if you have not started yet, which year groups you might start with, and so on. I will look in more detail with you in future videos, depending if you pick the French or Spanish specific videos on doing this in more detail, but now is a good time perhaps to reflect on beginning. So we're going to look in a little bit more detail at how we can introduce it in primary level to realise the curriculum for Wales and to meet it, because there's sometimes a little bit of confusion related to, are we teaching one specific language, or do we need to just have lots of languages and look at our EAL learners' languages? If we look at the wording of the new curriculum, sometimes we might not be sure. So the question some people ask is, are there two main models of multilingualism? Can we go down one route rather than the other? If you're just having one international language focus, where you're focusing on the progression steps, where there's isolated lessons of language, but they also then is embedded cross-curricular topics, maybe so you give that language a context to use, so that you bring in both rather than either or. The flip side then is, if you're building just a general multilingual awareness, that would look like you're exploring with your pupils language and identity, how they're linked, and then you're making sure that you showcase EAL home or community languages. So for example, some schools have started introducing multilingualism to meet the curriculum for Wales by looking at language of the month, and each month focusing on a different language from a EAL learner and learning a little bit more, everybody giving that language a go. And neither of these ways of doing it is wrong, neither is better than the other, but really what we need is the two. If we're having one main international language focus, we're going to be able to get pupils to meet progression step 2 and then progression step 3. We'll really see that progress, and they'll really build construction and depth in one language. It hopefully, depending on your context, it's not always possible, but hopefully will prepare them for transition if all of the cluster are able to have the same language. It's not always possible. Then you can also build continuity across your classes, so you really embed within the school culture. For example, we are a Spanish-speaking school, and each year they're building on it, and it really embeds into the ethos of the whole school. It's very easy then to make links between Welsh and English and develop a multilingual approach this way. And there are a lot of ready-made resources out there for a few languages, not all. So the future videos I will be doing on specific resources will be for French and Spanish, as those are my specialisms, and that's what we tend to see the most support for in terms of resources. And there's so much out there already for, like, say, for a handful of languages. There's loads there. You don't need to create anything from scratch. If we're then also embedding this multilingual ethos and awareness throughout the school, we'll make sure that we're including our EAL pupils' languages, our English as an additional language learners. We'll not be leaving that identity at the door, but we'll be showing that your language is part of who you are. It's a chance for parental involvement. Get the parents in to do assemblies on their culture and language. It helps your children from an early age to build acceptance for the fact that pupils around them will be different, will have different cultures, might call their parents by a different word, might eat different things in their lunchbox. So we build that ethos of acceptance and celebration. And not only then, if we only focused on one international language, we wouldn't have the opportunity to look at a wide variety of cultures and really enrich the pupils' learning experiences by travelling, so to speak, to different cultures. So that it really helps them understand overall what a language is, how does it link to who you are, and you can make loads of connections then to anti-racism and why each person's identity is different. So putting the two together is vital to meet, as we've seen with all of the different progression steps. Yes, there are areas where we need to focus on one language to meet the progression steps, to build that real rich knowledge of one language. But if we neglect the other languages that might be present in our school, the opportunities to see other cultures, we're really missing a chance for pupils to really embed the understanding of what a language is and how it links to your identity, and why it's so important for individuals to celebrate that part of their identity if they have another language. So just want to pause here again. So while we're thinking of this and the kind of bringing in these two different streams of integrating multilingualism and teaching a language, what do you feel in your context are the biggest stumbling blocks to this? What is in the way? What would be the difficult things to get over in order to start that? And hopefully, if you're meeting together now as an INSET or an ad session, you begin to talk about how you could approach some of those stumbling blocks. But if there's still further questions, please do get in touch. Please reach out or have a look through the team, as I've mentioned, where you might find some resources that will help you. So looking first of all then, before we embed an international language specifically, many schools have seen success by embedding first of all a cultural shift, really developing a cultural shift in their school of that we are multilingual, having this multilingual ethos that we all have buy-in, we all see the benefits of learning another language, we all understand why we're doing this. And there are lots of resources out there, and I will also be doing a separate video on specific multilingualism resources, but just wanted to give you some ideas here that you could use. So there is a multilingualism toolkit, which again is saved in the team, that was developed by partner Ieithoedd a few years ago. As well, the counties there were involved, and different individuals, in creating a toolkit to help teachers understand how to embed multilingualism. There were several schools involved in the project where they trialled different things and gave feedback, and there's lots of different ideas in there. But some of the things that are nice to do that you could perhaps pause and do now as a staff, or you can do with your pupils, one thing is called a body map. So where you think about all the languages you know, or that you have a connection to, or you have a feeling towards, where would you put them on your body? And as you begin to do it, you realize you have more connections to languages than you realized, or you have between you in the room a lot more languages present again than you realized. So here's one example. We'll just pull out a few things. So, for example, this Manon would put in her eyes Arabic because in the future, looking forward, she'd love to learn Arabic. But maybe in her legs, she would put French, as she studied French for many years and it enabled her to find jobs and enjoy holidays. Spanish in her fingers because she uses her fingers learning Spanish on the Duolingo app. And Welsh because it's most attached to where she's from and her heart. And Thai in the stomach because it's one of her favourite cuisines. Makes her think of Thailand and its culture. Maybe you see some of the words on menus and so on. So it's a really useful activity to get people thinking about all the language they're connected to. So you could do it as a staff, as a pupil, as pupils, as a whole school. Here's just some pupil examples from the multilingualism toolkit. So it's a great way to get pupils, before they even start learning an international language, thinking about all the languages they already have a connection to and things that they'd like to learn, and looking at each other. The person next to them might have a lot more languages connected to them than they realised. So it's a really great way to explore each other's identity. There's a lot of resources then through different organisations, and again, lots of them are saved in the team. And this is one from WAMCAM, We Are Multilingual. And it's a great resource to show to your children and as a staff to look at. That if we can answer yes to any of these questions, am I learning a language at school? I can use sign languages, I can use computer code, I speak a dialect, I speak a home language and so on, then you are multilingual. We want to get away from the idea that unless you're fluent, you are not a speaker of that language. That if you can communicate even 5 words, 10 words, 20 words, you are a speaker of that language. You are multilingual because you can communicate in another language. So we're all multilingual. In Wales, we are constantly seeing, hearing, using Welsh, as well as lots of other community languages around us we'll be experiencing, and we'll pick up different words. We want to show to children it's that growth mindset of, we're not trying to be fluent, we're not trying to get it all completely correct. If we make mistakes, it's okay, we're going to give it a go because we are multilingual. And some of these quotes here are taken straight from the Multilingualism Toolkit, which unfortunately is just in English. And it talks about why we need to create a rich multilingual environment in our schools. So looking at some of the statistics, that there are so many languages in the world today, and we don't want our children to miss out on experiencing the richness that they bring. Our region is becoming more and more linguistically diverse. So the region across sort of South West, Midwest Wales, there are over 140 different languages and dialects spoken. So it's important that in order for them to recognise that these languages are a positive, that different culture and language are linked, we need to be showing that in school and have a shared vision in school that we embrace multilingualism. And there's so much more that we could look at in terms of the benefits of languages to cognitive ability, how it develops your problem solving skills. It's one of the best things that has been linked to developing and strengthening your memory. It helps to develop children's reading skills in their own language and so on. But we haven't got time to explore all of that today. I just wanted to show you some examples from real context then of a school that has developed this idea of multilingualism. So this is a primary school in Swansea, Pentre-Graig, and they've done some things like having some inclusive classroom displays which highlight children from different countries in their school and the different languages. They have a respect inclusive wall which has the word respect in lots of different languages and highlights culture from their different countries. They have a multilingual word wall which parents can add to. So at the moment this was on hello, and all the parents would come in and add their word for hello to here. And there's other things you can do. I've seen in schools lovely ideas where you create a clock display which shows the time in all the different countries that are represented in the school, the different home countries, or bunting across doors that represent, before even you go into the classroom, all of the different nationalities and languages that are present in the classroom. So you really make their identities, their different cultures, part of the curriculum, part of the school life. Some of the other things that Pentre-Graig have done then, they do things like when they have a key topic word, so for example this is the word home, a year 1 key topic word, they ensure that there is a little resource available for children to use that has the key topic word in all of the different home languages, which helps children develop their reading skills and writing skills in their home language. It highlights it to other pupils, they can give it a go, but also supports them with spelling across the different languages. They have a multilingual book area where children can go and read books in their home language to ensure they are developing that skill and maintaining that skill. And sometimes children will sit and read corresponding books, so Hungry Caterpillar in English with a Hungry Caterpillar in Urdu or something. They also do Language of the Month, where they each month take a language from one of their EAL pupils, and a parent comes in, they develop an assembly, they have pupils involved, their pupil ambassadors, their language ambassadors, language champions, and throughout they have an assembly on the culture and the language. Then throughout the month they have different levels of challenge that pupils will try to learn some of the language from that country. So as a school they are learning French, but they also have these moments where they're highlighting and celebrating other languages. And you might not be in a school with a very low EAL percentage, but all the more reason to develop and discover other languages, because if pupils aren't experiencing different language and cultures in school, we need to model how they should approach it, how they approach differences with empathy for when they do experience those different language and cultures outside of school. There's another resource I will be highlighting in a future video in more detail, but I wanted to mention today, called Language Explorers, which was developed by the partner Ieithoedd counties. And this really has been designed to help to meet the new curriculum for Wales, especially regarding the descriptions of learning for languages connectus and understanding language. So there is an awful lot in this resource. It's a series of lessons, PowerPoint slides that help children link language to identity and really explore some of these themes from the new curriculum. And there's some lovely activities in there that help them look at comparison. So for example, what do these English words mean? So all of these different words that children might use today compared to what we as adults, they could say to your head teacher, what do you think beef means? And looking at how language has changed and all these new words coming in. There's nice comparisons as well to looking at, and that was one of the progression step 3 statements, looking at how there are different accents and dialects and language differences, so looking at differences across Wales in Welsh. And there's also a lovely activity linking French. So even if you're not learning French as a school, it's a nice way to explore cultural links with Celtic regions, because in the north of France, in Brittany, in Bretagne, they speak a language called Breton, and there was a lot of links between Breton and Welsh, as can be seen in this. They could get to know listen to a song, they could discover how the Breton national anthem is exactly the same tune and same national anthem as the Welsh national anthem, and look at all these different connections and discover why and make these links, as is highlighted in the new curriculum. So this is a lovely resource that before people start learning another language or alongside it, they could learn all about what is language, why do languages change, why is language important. So another chance for reflection, if it's relevant for you here, if you'd like to pause the video, you can, and think about your school and setting, and think about, in terms of multilingualism specifically here, are we aware, first of all, of the languages and cultures of our staff and pupils in our school? Do you personally feel multilingual? Do we feel multilingual as a school? What can we do in order to take the next steps to do that? Is our environment enabling multilingualism so far? Does it display it? Is it giving opportunities to see that? And how are staff enabling it? What could be the next steps? So take a chance to pause here for how our staff are enabling it, and have a think about these reflection points and what could be some next steps towards just the multilingualism side of what we've been looking at. Okay, so we're going to look now then at the overall picture and planning. How might it look in school if we're putting all that we've looked at so far together? So I really want to emphasise that there is no one size fits all, that every school has to reflect on what could work best for them and their context and their pupils, the staff that you have, and so on. So if we're doing this blended approach, that we're ensuring we are teaching one specific language at least in detail, but we are also bringing in multilingualism and celebration of other cultures and languages, this could be one model of how you approached it. So it might be that you're year 5 and 6, or it could be your year 4, 5 and 6, depending on how your classes are structured. You could pick, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is, but it works quite well on a Friday. If you're doing French or Spanish, to do French Fridays, Fiesta Fridays. And it could be that you manage to have 15 minutes of a specific language, or Mandarin, German. I'm not specifying the language, this is just an example, where they're working towards progression step 3. Then again, depending on your year group structure, it could be your years 3 to 4, or your years 2 to 4, or your 2s and 3s, are more having songs with some basic vocabulary to introduce. And again, it could be on the same day, or it could be fortnightly, depending when you bring it in. But they're beginning to have that taster of hearing the language and opportunities to experience it and literature. Then in terms of multilingualism and taking language outside of the classroom, you could have whole school occasional or monthly assemblies that highlight the home language and culture of an EAL pupil, or if your EAL percentage is very low, it could be a particular, if you're studying Spanish, it could be a particular Hispanic festival or a different festival from around the world that is happening at that moment in any country. And then you could also then, if you're a Spanish-speaking school, have Spanish greetings in assembly on that set day. So if your language lessons are a Friday, you could make sure everybody is using French, Spanish, German, whatever it is, throughout the day in assembly as you pass in the corridor for your registration and so on. And then across the curriculum then, across all year groups, it could be that you embed it first from year 3 to 6, it could go lower down, but in line with the progression steps, looking at different international cultural content. So around Christmas time, how do they celebrate Christmas in France or in another French-speaking country? Around Halloween, looking at Day of the Dead in Mexico. If they were learning the a Romans topic, you could have a look at comparing Rome today, so you're having a little bit of a flavour of Italy, and then maybe have a try of some Italian food or learn some Italian food words in Italian. So it's very much not prescribed in how much you do and what year groups you fit it into and so on. But this is just one example that lots of schools tend to have an approach like this that have started. In terms of deciding which language then, you might already have decided as a school, but if you haven't, this is taken straight from the curriculum for Wales. And so just some guidance here that the choice of which international language is very much your school or cluster. It might be that you've met as a cluster to decide. You don't have to just teach one international language, as it says. You could offer different ones, and I'll show an example of a school who are doing that. They reference collaborating with others. So it could be that you have live lessons happening that are online with another school that are doing it, or the secondary school are coming down. And again, you can offer languages that are used by your staff. So if you have a Spanish speaker on staff, a Polish speaker on staff, whatever it is, utilize those resources that you have. But bear in mind that if your only source of language is that Spanish speaking teaching assistant, for example, if they leave the school, what are you going to put in place? Or if circumstances change, what will you put in place? So ensuring it is we have a whole school approach so that there is continuity after. And really take advantage of opportunities globally and digitally, and I'll show you one of those in a moment. So as I mentioned, you can bring in more than one. It doesn't have to feed into the cluster secondary. Really all depends on your context, as long as we're building curious learners with a love for language learning and other cultures. And it could be that you pick a term-only language that where you're still able to show some progress in, but you're giving them more exposure so that they can communicate in a growing range of languages. It has to suit your context. So one example I mentioned of outside is Ysgol is a pan-Wales initiative of using online learning to support language and enriching the curriculum. And they are developing more and more modern foreign language lessons online. So for the last few years, they've had success with German live lessons, where and these ones they recorded that are on their website are from the summer term of 23 to 24, where they usually will have a series of 4 to 6 hour live lessons that you can sign up and join. And they've got some that they've saved on their website, and they are developing Spanish ones as well. So it might be that as a school, you are a French learning school or a Spanish speaking school, but you pause for a term maybe it's around the time when you're learning something specific to another country or a culture or a topic related, and you decide, let's do these live lessons, or let's watch the pre-recorded or the recorded live lessons. So we're giving our pupils a flavour of another language, just exciting their curiosity, tapping into that novelty value that will excite them in learning another language. So here's one example of a school, again, just an example that you might get some ideas from, that in Swansea that are using different languages within the same school. So the Confucius Institute is a fantastic institute where they will come in, one based in University of Wales, Trinity St David, will come into schools. There's different Confucius Institutes around the area. The one for this region is the one in UWTSD. They will come into school and teach Mandarin lessons. So they have a Mandarin teacher come in, and she teaches 45 minutes of Mandarin per week to each of the year 4, 5 and 6 classes. And this school have actually taken it a step further, and were the first Mandarin choir in Wales. They visited the campus with the Confucius Institute, and 8 of their year 6 pupils as well have taken a Mandarin qualification recently. So just some extra steps that they are doing, but this is the main language that all years 4 to 6 are learning. They also then have links with the Cluster Comprehensive, Bryn Tawy, where the teacher there, where possible, will come down once a fortnight to do some year 6 French lessons with year 6 to help prepare them for transition. And also the year 4 class teacher at the time when I visited had some French experience, so was delivering a fortnightly French lesson. And again, using the knowledge of teachers within school, the current year 5 teacher had experience of Spanish and spent time in Patagonia on a project with Welsh Government, and was teaching some Spanish, about 15 minutes of Spanish a week as well. So they were experiencing Mandarin and French and Spanish at different points throughout their schooling, and really making use of a resource I will show you in future lessons, future videos, of Ieithoedd, which is a wonderful website where you can use to bring in songs across English, Welsh and a third international language. And it has a Patagonia project, so they were making links with Welsh and Spanish there. And you can see here, if you pause it, around the main screen of the classroom, there was daily Spanish words, so that pupils always had them there to encourage them to use them. They're part of the display. So as well as using them in lesson, throughout the week, pupils can see them there and they could make opportunity to use them. So if you are ready to get started in school, please see future videos about specific resources, but here's some ideas for communicative purposes that you can be using Spanish, French, German, whatever it is for, so they're taking it out of the context just of the lesson and actually using it for communication. So it could be during circle time, however you use that, there could be opportunities there. You could have a brain break during other lessons where you take a pause between different lessons, and they just need, you can see the class need a little bit of a boost. Let's put on our Spanish song of the month, whatever it is. It could be that in your numeracy lessons you use Spanish numbers and maybe use it as a movement break, that you get them up playing a bit of a game, doing Spanish numbers, bingo, whatever it is, just to break things up and bring the Spanish back into context. It could be as different parts of the school day, as I've mentioned before: registration, passing fruit, saying if they're sandwiches or dinners, doing story time, having a book that's in Spanish off from YouTube or something like that. For transition instructions, as they're going out to playtime, coming back in, hanging up bags, learning some instructions that you can use, or you can get the pupils to learn and model and say to the others. If you, depending how you do your morning feelings, learning those in Spanish, French, German, so that you can have a context for using those words. They could use them as part of their morning feelings. And again, as I mentioned, doing assemblies, greeting them as they come in, having a word of the week in assembly or something like that. So all of the resources I have mentioned throughout this video and future resources are saved in a Microsoft team that we have created for this region. So some regions have their own Microsoft teams for primary international languages. These are the same resources that I was seconded to Swansea last year. We have a team there, so they're the same resources that are there if you're from Swansea. But this is one we've set up for the whole region to access and to share resources as well. So you can access the team through this QR code, and I will approve your request to join. But you can also find it in the link where this video is saved on Hub, or you can email myself. So within the International Languages Microsoft team here for South, West, Mid and West Wales, you will see there are different sections. In the Primary International Languages section, if you click in Shared, you'll see the different resource areas where you can find different resources. So CPD, this is where I did a full day when I was seconded to Swansea last year on multilingualism in LLC. So we broke down all of the CPD that we're going to be doing in videos is broken down. We did a full day on it. So all the resources are there. There's loads more that I haven't mentioned today and things I've mentioned. There's different outside agency support details here, different global future stakeholders like the Confucius Institute who want to come into schools and help. And then this folder here, the language teaching resources, is the specific folder where you will find resources you can use straight away to get teaching language and delivering languages in your school. So as I mentioned, there's future videos coming, which I'll mention again and what those are. But as well as that, there is a full list here. This is just a snapshot of it that was created last year that has it broken down into sections. If you look at multilingualism resources, Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, whatever it is, there's loads of links there. And within the resources folder then, everything has been split. Again, if you're looking at getting started with multilingualism, so the multilingualism toolkit I mentioned and other resources are saved here. Otherwise, within here, there are resources you can use straight away, especially in French and Spanish. Those are the most commonly taught languages, and those are the ones that very often have had resources provided for them, and often German too, made by stakeholders. For example, Roots into Languages have created a toolkit for each of these languages you can use straight away in primary school. So upcoming videos then, there's 3 main resource videos that will be published after this one, where basically it's how you get started with French or how you get started with Spanish, and then how you get started as well with multilingualism, where I'll go through some of the resources and schemes of work that are available and how you would use them actually in a classroom, model a lesson, and how you would deliver it as a non-specialist. So do watch out for those being published. So just to finish then, if you're thinking, right, how do I get started? What are kind of our summary points to get me going? It might be nice if you're ready to start with it teaching a language to have as you launch it, to have a particular day or a week, an assembly where you, as a school, you launch the start of your language learning journey. It might be that you start on a small scale with answering the class every day or answering the class every once a week in that language, French or Spanish, whatever it is, or your morning greetings. You could begin to include, as I've mentioned, assemblies on, if it's Spanish, Hispanic festivals, and you could have a day where pupils come in costumes or fancy dress linked to it. They could dress as particular foods. If it's France, can you dress as a baguette, as a flag, whatever it is, listen to some French music and so on. And when you're ready to start specific teaching, it might be you aim first of all at years 5 and 6 in helping them to prepare for transition. And another nice idea for bringing pupils in, we mentioned a little bit about pupil voice earlier on in the session, is you could have language ambassadors, or some schools have called them language champions. It might be that pupils are interviewed for this to really give it prestige, or you could choose your pupils and use it for pupil voice, get them to help decide what to learn, how would they like to promote Spanish, French around the school and so on. And if it's Spanish that the school are focusing on, they could be the ones to deliver the Spanish or French, German, whatever it is, word of the week in assembly, for example. So thank you very much for joining this session, and do please share it with others, share it with your cluster, share it with other members of staff in your school. And as I said, please keep an eye out for the future videos that will be published that will take you more into how you then deliver it specifically right within the lessons. And do please get in touch as well with any questions, and I will see whatever I can do to help you or point you in the right direction. So diolch yn fawr iawn, and thank you for listening, and I do hope to meet you one day in person.